Joining us now, Wall Street Journal reporter Eric Schwartzel. His new book, entitled Red Carpet, Hollywood, China, and the Global Battle for Cultural Supremacy. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this book. You also have an op-ed called Switching Gears. Let's talk about how Richard Gere, first of all, went from the A-list to the blacklist.
You're right. That movie, Red Corner, came out more than 2 decades ago, but it is still costing Richard Gere in Hollywood. And the reason why has all to do with China's economic leverage over Hollywood. When that movie came out in 1997, Richard Gere was probably the most famous supporter of the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people. And the Chinese box office was something of an afterthought to studios. That's not the case these days. And over the next 2 decades, China's box office would grow until it was eventually #1 in the world. And every Hollywood studio knew that they would have to maintain access to that market. And that meant keeping the Communist Party officials who approve movies happy. And that meant not hiring actors like Richard Gere, who would become radioactive because of their previous support.
And now there's so much talk and concern and discussion about the rise of China, economically especially, but now also wielding cultural supremacy, whether it be over actors in Hollywood or sports stars. What problems does that pose?
Well, I think what it's done is it's really put something of an economic muzzle on a lot of people, not just in Hollywood or sports, but just Western business in general, because Chinese authorities have shown through many examples that crossing them politically will result in economic consequences, closing access to the market. When Richard Gere's movie Red Corner came out in 1997, he was banned from doing work in the country, but so was the studio that released the film, MGM. And so it only takes a couple examples like that for everyone across Hollywood or Western business to absorb the lesson that as China rises and its political stances become more and more of an issue on the world stage, you really can't engage them in any kind of meaningful dialogue, or else you might be turned off from its 1.4 billion consumers.
And money talks. You think about John Cena, who had to apologize in Mandarin for saying Taiwan is a country.
我爱更尊重中国更中国人，我很抱歉。
These examples, they're spooky and they seem threatening to me, and yet it happens.
Well, I think an example like John Cena is a good one, because I think what he's doing there is he's trying to avoid the fate of someone like Richard Gere. When Richard Gere was so publicly supporting the Dalai Lama in Tibet and criticizing the Chinese authorities, he never apologized for it. And that is why he's just too radioactive for a major studio to hire these days. I think someone like John Cena or any Western executive who rushes to correct themselves or apologize to the Chinese people have absorbed that lesson and have figured out, I need to apologize if I want to be able to maintain access here and still see my movies get released there.
And LeBron James and his sneaker market. I mean, is this just a shoe that fits, excuse the pun, where, these people want to make money and China's willing to buy them? Or is it a strategy on the part of China?
I think it's both. I think it is still an economic no-brainer for a lot of the people running these companies to try and do whatever they can to maintain access to the Chinese market. But you're absolutely right. Throughout history, China has had this approach where they find very public examples and they really just will say, look, if you cross us, you're out, you're banned, there's no negotiating. And oftentimes those very public examples teach everyone a lesson. And we've seen that as China has grown more aggressive on the world stage, that has really come to their advantage, because no one's really pushing back in the business community or certainly in the cultural community, because they don't want to lose that access.
And I want to understand President Biden's role in all this, but also what you think should happen in the future. Is there any way to perhaps contain what I think is a growing problem as this continues?
I think that you're right. There's something of a cultural Cold War happening frankly out of sight, I think, to most Americans. We've had 100 years of cultural supremacy, largely through the power of Hollywood, and China has observed that, and they know that as they try to become something of a superpower on the world stage, that they too need a cultural complement to that. Joe Biden, while he was very involved in opening the Chinese market during the Obama administration to Hollywood, and therefore really cementing China's leverage over Hollywood through some deals he helped the studios negotiate about a decade ago, he's really not been engaged on this issue. And I traveled when I was reporting this book to Kenya, where there's obviously such a huge Chinese presence through the Belt and Road Initiative. But what is not really being discussed nearly as much is the cultural element of that too. I went into apartments far outside Nairobi and would find families watching Chinese soap operas or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, exactly the playbook that America had deployed a century or, over the past century, and instead now being one with Chinese values and Chinese entertainment being shipped around the world.
The new book is Red Carpet, Hollywood, China, and the Global Battle for Cultural Supremacy. Absolutely fascinating. Erich Schwartzel, thank you very much for being on this morning.